Hi, I'm Dennis Weiss for Eagle Communications. Welcome to our town. And today the town is Clay Center. We have Congressman Roger Marshall. Welcome to the town.
Dennis, glad to be here in Clay Center. What an exciting day.
Big first district is big, isn't it?
It is huge. It takes about 8 hours to drive corner to corner from it.
And you're out making a tour.
We sure are. We kind of started with the wheat tour in Manhattan, kind of followed them and met them in Wichita last night, places in between, and Secretary of the Army is going to be in Fort Riley this evening. I'm going to meet with him.
Terrific. So you can give us a wheat report. How is it?
Well, I don't think it's good news. Okay. You know, it sounds like last year maybe we averaged about 40 bushels per acre, and this year it's looking at about 32. So it's a little bit of a concern.
Well, good thing we have some piles of wheat at almost every country elevator, I guess. Right,
well, that's true, but the good thing is that we have a farm bill that we passed through committee, and it's just a year like this that we need this crop insurance for these farmers. Crop insurance allows a farmer who had a bad year to plant next year's crop. So there's some significant places of drought where the wheat crop is so bad they're going to have to plow it under and probably plant sorghum.
So I think I asked you this question when you were running for office. We were at the Eisenhower Presidential Library.
Remember that?
And so now you know the answer, so I can.
Oh, wow.
So we talked about the farm bill, and we said, you know, how do two country guys go to Washington, D.C., talk about a farm bill and have impact on something that's 80% food stamps? How's that working?
It's working great. What I've tried really hard to do is develop relationships with congressmen from an inner city and who have nutritional needs more than they have farming communities. And I've tried to connect the agriculture producer to the consumer. So, you know, a great story, Goodland, Kansas, a group of farmers couldn't grow sugar beets very well, so they started growing pinto beans. Right. Today they grow 40 million pounds of pinto beans. They ship those to food banks across the country, and every day 1 million Americans eating a serving of those beans.
Great beans.
So this farm bill actually quadrupled the amount of money for food banks. So it's a great example of how I've tried to connect agriculture to the consumers.
I was in on a trip one time where government brought some people from government from Maryland, if I recall. They had no concept of what they were seeing, and that's when the disconnect to me became real. Okay, so everybody eats everywhere they live, but the disconnect about how food is produced in this country is still a wide gap.
It's interesting. Some people actually think meat comes from the grocery store and don't really have a concept of where it starts, let alone milk. And milk is another product that I've fought very hard to get back on the menus, whole milk in school lunches as well.
We have a terrific dairy. You probably drove by it out by Junction City. They're shipping milk in glass to local grocery stores now, and it's just terrific. They have specialty products.
The fastest growing dairy herd in the country now is in Kansas.
Is that right?
And that kind of makes me think of problems with tariffs and trade issues going on right now. Canada has a milk policy that's hurting my milk processing plant in Garden City, Kansas. So again, trying to connect consumers to the milk issues going on across the world. What happened was Canada was able to dump a bunch of milk on the market, and China chose to buy that rather than some of the milk, the processed milk we had coming out of Garden City. And I wouldn't doubt that some of that milk from the dairy you're talking about in Johnson, Kansas ends up right there in Garden City.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, you know, we sit here out here in the country, and our view of process at Washington's the news, right?
Yes.
What we see and what we read. So I'm a sales guy. So when I look at this tariff discussion, I'm a free trader. Just have to say so. I'm a free trader. So when I hear the word tariff, I go, okay. But I also get the art of negotiation.
Right.
You've got to have there's some things in the world going on that need negotiated out. So the other thing I think maybe I've figured out is there's a lot more complexity in Washington than it looks from the outside.
I think that's true. And certainly I'm against tariffs. I'm a free trader. Tariffs are a tax on a consumer.
Right.
And what I've tried to do is be a strong voice in Washington for agriculture, explaining to the president and his staff how these tariffs hurt Kansas agriculture. So for instance, way back in February when the president announced tariffs on solar panels and washing machines, overnight the price of sorghum went down $1 a bushel. That's a huge impact to a producer in Kansas.
Right.
So always agriculture is the tip of the spear when it comes to retaliation. So I'm trying to help the president understand that I certainly appreciate his wishes. His wishes, his goals, his vision is much like mine. We want to grow jobs in this country. We want to buy USA products, but please try to hold agriculture harmless. Please don't make us collateral damage in this war.
So I look at that and I couldn't agree more, Congressman Marshall. I grew up on a farm, still connected to the land. So my first thought from my heart is always that, right? But I look at the piles of grain we have around and know that, you know, producing agriculture, our job on the farm is to produce that grain.
Right.
We've always done an outstanding job, and every year that goes by we do even better. But what was it, 2015? Average farm income, $8,000 net income.
Yeah. We're down 50% from 5 years ago. And again, this is why it's so important that we write a strong farm bill. Every 5 years we write a farm bill. We need to give the farmers, the producers, the certainty that a farm bill can do. It needs to have strong crop insurance, and then we need to have a safety net. And again, connecting back to these consumers, what I try to explain to consumers why crop insurance is so important is that the policy, the agriculture policy of the last 30 years have created very inexpensive groceries. The average consumer in this country spends 6 to 8% of their dollars on groceries versus in other developed countries they're spending 18 to 22%. So again, this, you know, your first question, connecting production to consumers, so that's exactly why it's so important.
So we may spend all 25 minutes talking about nothing but ag, but that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, because, okay, so I see a picture on the news a week ago, 2 weeks ago, of President Moon, President Un, North and South Korea, stepping across the dividing line between their countries and stepping back. And so, first of all, I'm 60 years old, and that country has been in a constant state of war. It was an armistice, not a treaty. So, you know,
since your fathers and our grandfathers were in the Korean War.
Exactly. So, you know, that's an eye-opening moment. That's something that's never happened in my lifetime. So I'm looking at that, and I think I'm very grateful that the opportunity for peace exists. The second thought I had is, what a market. What a market opening moment this could be in the next 6 months or a year if we can actually put agriculture products into North Korea. That's a hungry land.
Absolutely. You know, I certainly remember when Henry Kissinger went to China, when you and I were probably in middle school, and what that market has become to agriculture. Now, we got some hiccups. Maybe we'll talk about China later. But this is another once-in-a-lifetime opportunity during this president's occupation of the White House and my little stay in Washington as well. Once in a generation. President Trump seems a little bit unconventional. It just seems like a year ago people thought he had the worst foreign policy in the history of our presidents. But here we are today. He's able to do something that no other president's been able to get to do, with the goal of totally taking nuclear weapons off the peninsula of Korea.
You know, it's awfully easy for me to overanalyze the details of something because my mind's interested in it. So a number of years ago, I just made a conscious choice that I'm going to be more focused on the results and let you or her or Dave work out the details of how you get to those successes. And if you look at Mr. Trump from that perspective, we're getting a lot of things done that fiscal, social conservatives who live in Kansas wanted a long time.
Yeah, I think he's knocking it out of the park. You know, let's think first of all about national security. ISIS is 1% the size she was a year ago. Our southern border, maybe 80% more secure. We just, the president asked for 75 miles of the wall. We gave him 90 miles of funding for the wall, added a lot more boots on the ground, a lot more intelligence down there as well. So working very hard on national security. Think about the economy, what's happening, the results of the economy. We passed our Tax Cuts and Jobs bill 4 months ago. Already over 4 million Americans have received a bonus, the fastest wage growth we've seen in decades, and 3% GDP growth. A year ago, people told us, the experts, the pond have said, all those were impossible. So let's focus on the results. We have better national security, a stronger economy. We're working on immigration. So many great, wonderful opportunities sitting here ahead of us.
So we were hosted today by the Clay County Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Group. They work together here in town, and we have people coming and going, which makes me happy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll put up with all the dings.
We couldn't find a parking spot in Clay Center today. What is going on?
They're going and growing. They're terrific. I hear your schedule, or maybe already been to a manufacturing plant and several other things in town. Clay Center is going and growing. This section of the country that you represent in the Big First is poised for growth, just like America that you were just telling the national story. We have growth right here. You know, our one missing ingredient, and I'm convinced we can hook this fish, is people.
Yes, sir.
We just need people. We need workers, we need young professionals, we need skilled tradesmen, and we need kids in schools. That is the magic potion for central and western Kansas.
You know, you nailed it. The biggest challenge for Kansas for the next decade is going to be people. We have 50,000 open jobs across this state right now. The entire country has 5 to 6 million open jobs. So how are we going to attract those people to Kansas? And you know, think of the Farm Bill again, connecting this Farm Bill to everybody across this district. We allocated another $1.1 billion to build out rural broadband. You're not going to get young people to move back to Clay Center in Kansas unless they have access to high-speed internet. GT Manufacturing, working with them this morning, a small manufacturing company that exports to over 83 countries, this wonderful grain dryer. They have to have high-speed internet to connect to their customers and give them the customer service that they want. So that's one of the keys, one of the things we're focusing on. We have great community colleges and technical colleges across this state. So let's take these people. If you're a person today and you don't have a job in Kansas and live in Kansas, either you can't pass a drug test or you don't have the proper education. The answers are right here in our back door. People come to Washington and want me to solve their problems. And what I try to tell them is, look, you've got the solutions right here in Kansas. If you don't have a good job, then go to a community college. Go to Cloud County Community College. For the past 12, 14 years, they have a wind energy program. They're just opening up a solar energy program. If you go spend a year at Cloud County Community College, you're going to get a job $60,000, $80,000 a year. And I mean, you and I don't know all your background, but we were raised with less income than that.
Absolutely.
In small rural Kansas, you can own a house, own a car, and send your kids to college on that type of money.
I've asked both the major John Deere dealers in our area. You know, it used to be John Deere dealer was one little store. Well, they're not anymore. They're multiple stores, but they're very important businesses in our community, these tractor dealerships. So the John Deere dealerships, I've asked both of their executives, so what can a combine mechanic make? Because that's what they're looking for. They go $100,000. $100,000.
More than a PhD in psychology.
And live here with the cost of living here. $100,000 with the cost of living in Kansas. You can't find a better situation than that in most of the country.
And great schools, great place to raise a family.
Great place to raise a family. And in tractors and combines, you're working with the latest technology that's not in space.
And one of the things that I see, though, is to be a mechanic today has to have some type of computer skills.
Absolutely.
So I'm just trying to convince any school system, our State Board of Education, if we're allowing our kids to get through middle school, let alone high school, without some introduction to some pretty sophisticated computer technology, you're doing a disservice to our students. The same way for our colleges, our technical colleges. You know, the welding shops we go to today, one person is running 4 welders at the same time. They have to have some type of computer technology background.
Right. We're seeing that all over, Congressman. I've got some good news to share with you.
Good news. I'm ready for good news.
Well, good news, you know, we're putting a new manufacturing plant in Abilene down the road from here. It's Bradford built. They're in Washington County.
With Bradford
They're expanding to Abilene. They're not doing anything different in Washington, but they are growing in Abilene. And they're making 100 beds a day up here in Washington, a week up here. They want to make 100 a day in Abilene. So how are they going to do that with 50 employees? It's going to be robotics. There's no question about that.
But his story is a great story.
Terrific.
Brad's story is that, you know, he had a horrible, I believe, a car injury. He was in an automobile accident. He was down in his back. He lost his job, and he went in his garage and made this truck bed. in his spare time, and then one of his neighbors saw it, and they said, well, can you make me one? And here we are years later. He has a wonderful manufacturing shop up there, and more than that, though, he's invested in his downtown community. He's built a brewery. They have a restaurant across the street.
Right.
You know, that's what people say, what is it going to take to make rural Kansas survive? And Brad is a great example. It's called leadership. It's investing in your own community. You go down to Garden City and see what Cecil O'Brate has done down there, working with the community, whether it's housing or 170 kids on scholarships.
You know, you mentioned $1 billion or thereabouts for a broadband bill coming up. So recently the state of Kansas put together a 17-member broadband commission. Okay. And I'm encouraged by that because it's a diverse group. They're going to look at the local view of broadband. You know, the money from Washington is good, but the local view and where to put it's probably absolutely necessary to make it great.
Exactly.
Right? So we're moving along with that. We're a broadband company. We have another broadband company, Twin Valley, here in this community that's a tremendous family-owned business, has been for a long time. We have those scattered all over Kansas. Right. I asked this question at a conference one time, and the room got really quiet, and I kind of crept out. But what's the marginal cost of solving the last problem for broadband in Kansas? And as an example, that farmhouse, 20 miles from anywhere. The last
mile is always the most expensive
problem. So yeah, St. Francis isn't a big first.
Got a great coffee shop there, though, by the way.
They do, and they have fiber to the home internet. We built it last year. And we went through a government grant process a year before. We're pretty certain we wouldn't get any money because of the way the alignment is and who we are as a company. But we went through the process, but we went through it with St. Francis. And so when we didn't get the grant, they were very concerned, what can we do? So over a period of a few months, we just put our heads together and said, look, you promise us by signing up about 200 customers and give us some right-of-way and do some things for us that clear the way. Right. We'll just take our money and build it.
Right. So I had the same conversation with Chairman Pai a couple of weeks ago. He's the head of the FCC.
Yes,
he's from Southeast Kansas. His folks, I think, are physicians down there in Southeast Kansas. A nice young man. I say he's young. Yeah. He's probably 20 years younger than we are.
More people are looking younger.
They're looking younger. And what we talked about was how this would be instituted. And what my advice to him is make it totally transparent. So let's have first of all, got to figure this map out that we're figuring out where it's working, where it's not working. Let's get a good, accurate map, and then be transparent as we use this money. As long as it's transparent, the American consumer can look at this. We don't need to duplicate services in communities that already have them. We need to take this money and reach the true rural networks. In 2008, when the Obama administration rolled out some of their subsidies to do this, it was maybe not used in the best locations. So let's keep it transparent. Let's have local control figuring out where it needs to go. So I love your process there in St. Francis, the way you did it.
So it's taken me a while before I can say this without my blood pressure going way up in a real hurry. You just have to understand that the bigger the government is, the more likely waste and inefficiency happens. If that becomes a total brick wall for you, you can't make progress, right?
Absolutely.
So from there, you have to deal with it and find ways through and around the cracks. So it's just inefficiencies are going to happen. It doesn't mean it wasn't a good idea, and it doesn't mean that the next implementation can't be better. You have to keep moving forward to fix direction. There's a horse trainer before I did these sorts of things, and so one of the things I always taught my students is you can make no technical progress with your horse until he takes a forward step. Don't start steering your horse until you've got him moving forward. So economic development's the very same thing. Don't wait for the perfect idea. Move forward and adjust to the market forces. So St. Francis responded. We've been trying in Lincoln, same thing, 4 or 5 years, trying to put enough capital together over here. We could do the same thing in Lincoln, which is just over there. And we announced a couple weeks ago, same sort of plan with some local business leaders, economic development director. They said, we'd love to help you do this, and we're about 3 weeks into getting people signed up, and we got about 80 signed up. We need about 200. But if we can get that working, we'll build fiber to the home over there. And it's all based on that Lincoln will pay us a fair market rate for that product, but it changes their total view of their future. I'm not the guy who says broadband solves all the problem. You'll get this. I view broadband as a pair of vice grips in a toolbox. A wonderful tool, but they're worthless until somebody who knows what to do with the vice grip picks them up, right? So, but broadband's incredibly powerful when the right people pick it up.
Sure. But the analogy I use is launching a business, figuring out process in government is much like selling a sailboat. You have to launch her eventually.
Yeah.
And you're going to hit some headwinds. You have to tack back and forth into those winds. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here is let's launch this baby. But you know, the problem I see over and over, the theme is that government gets in the road. I was visiting with builders last week in Manhattan, Kansas. They're telling me a third of the cost of a new home going up is due to regulations created by the government. As I look at the cost of healthcare, not the cost of insurance, but the cost of healthcare, it's our government getting in the way, and I'm absolutely convinced that at least a third of the dollars spent on healthcare are spent on administration waste.
You should know.
I should know. It drove me out of medicine.
So my sister was a hospital administrator until she retired as CEO of a hospital in Rogers, Arkansas, and I used to call her up because of hospitals are my clients, so you know I'm interested in how they work and how these things work. And she said, you know, our administratives are at least doubled, simply to comply with regulation because of the weight of the penalties. You can't take the risk of being wrong. She said, we audit everything twice. We do all this twice, and there's the cost of health care. There's the cost of health care.
The number of administrators in hospitals has went up 400% over the last 30 years.
Yeah, well, I've had my sister started as a tech, so she drew my blood a time or two, but most hospital CEOs don't draw your blood or fix your knee, right?
Yeah.
So there we are. So I'm going to segue on you really quick here because he's got the camera pointed at me and I think we're getting short on time. So I read a really interesting article the other day. Agriculture, I read all the time about this stuff. So, and the summation of it is that production agriculture has done such a tremendous job of doubling production every 10 years, I think is what we were told we should do and have pretty much. But we 48 foot, 60 foot, 90 foot spray booms, all that equipment. And I look at it this way. Until I read the article, I said, well, that's what you do when you have to farm all those acres, and efficiency is the way you stay in business, right? The article's premise was that causes the problem of depopulation. I don't agree with the conclusion, but the linkage, the facts are correct. We can produce way more with less people, and there are some effects of that. So doesn't mean it's bad, doesn't mean it should be thrown out, but as I read some of the other things in the article, organic farming, so the O word has always been a negative, a pejorative, even in my farming circles, organic farming. And we always said those people have weeds in their crops, right? So, you know, I'm just a transparent guy. But the reality of it is there's some market benefits to small farms, organic crops or specialty crops. I just changed the word to specialty crops because the closer you get to your end market, the more profit you keep local and the more labor you need to do it, well, that's okay too. So I think there's room for both. Are you hearing anything about any of those trends in Washington, D.C.? Sure,
we do. And there's certainly some significant funding in the Farm Bill to help those organic farmers and some of those small operations go into effect. But my biggest concern is the congressman from the big first district is, what do I do with all these crops? And that's why I'm focusing so much of my time on trade, going to the NAFTA negotiations in Mexico City, going to China, going to Cuba, going to Israel. What type of markets can I open up for this production? You're right, it doesn't take as many people to run the family farm today as it did 20 years ago. You know, walking in here to GT Manufacturing, one person running 4 welders at the same time. That's why we've lost a lot of manufacturing jobs, is mechanization, modernization. So I'm dealing with the reality of the world. Kansas is the breadbasket of the world. We're doing incredible things across the state. So my job is to open new markets. We have to get NAFTA zipped up here in the next couple of weeks. We need to get over there to Japan, get that market market secured, get the tariff on beef lowered to at least equal with Australia. We need to get something set up with Great Britain as they exit the European Union, and on and on and on. I'm going to spend the next couple of years working on these trade negotiations.
Well, we wish you well. I know Dave has already given us the signal we're about out of time. You know, I have an 89-year-old uncle who still farms in upstate New York. His son runs a farm, but Uncle Jim still considers himself the farmer.
Okay.
And his conversation is always the same. It's a hungry world, boy. People need to eat. So here we are. We have production. We just need to remove those barriers that allow us to either not trade or for them to not be able to buy.
Yes, sir. Let's get it done.
All right. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. I
Good to
enjoyed
see
it.
you.
Yes, sir.
Safe travels on your trip.
Thank you.
I'm Dennis Weiss. I work for Eagle Communications. This is Roger Marshall. He's Congressman Roger Marshall. He works for the big 1st District right here in Kansas. You have a great day.